Welcome, everyone. My name is Julene Jackson. I am with Moms for America. I'm the National Vice President over cottage meetings, and this is why you get to see me, lucky you, every week in our online cottage meeting for Moms for America. I'm a mama of 5 children myself, ages 26 on down to 13. I live in Chevy Chase, Maryland. There are mamas and grandmothers all over the country. We span from coast to coast that are on these online cottage meetings each week. It has been so wonderful to get to know you, and it's possible even through the Zoom to kind of feel of each other's hearts and spirits. I certainly have felt of yours. Girls, we did it. This is the last class, the 16 of 16 of the Healing of America. Did you really think that you would stick with it? I want you to think for just a moment, how have these last 16 weeks, how has it made a difference? Has anything changed in your life, how you think, what you might be doing? I'm going to open up this question in just a minute, and a few of you can just share. How has the 16-week seminar, and maybe some of you came to it late, maybe you've only had 8 of the lessons, but really as we record every class, they're all there online. If you miss any classes, you can make them up. But how has what you've learned made an impact in your life, in your family, with your marriage, with your neighborhood, extended family members? You know, I really do believe that the gospel of freedom, and this is what I call it, the gospel of freedom that we've been learning and studying, is as real and as important as the gospel of Jesus Christ, because God's gospel can only prosper in an environment of freedom. And this is why I think God is so interested in governments. And I think this is why this is such a special land, because it is the home of the free. And God will continue to preserve and bless and heal this land as we do our part to stand up and fight for these freedoms and the liberty. And this inspired Constitution that our founders shed was indeed struck off by the hand of God. They gave God credit for that Constitution. And it gave us maximum freedom here in the United States of America. And with maximum freedom comes the maximum right to worship God and to live accordingly to his law. And so I believe these promises in the scriptures when, he says, God, we know God is a God of miracles, and that this nation shall endure in Isaiah, and that he can heal our land if we seek his face in 2 Chronicles, and we do our part. Whether it's just your part is just to keep on studying online, or maybe eventually to gather 4 or 5 ladies in your neighborhood and join, start a little study group, or, get more involved with your town hall meetings and, know these candidates, vet them, put the good ones, their signs in your yard, to take a stand for the good ones. Or I had a girlfriend that just went for the first time to a school board meeting last night. She didn't present anything. She didn't give a public comment. She just wanted to go see what it's like. And all you have to do is go to a school board meeting once or twice, and you kind of understand, okay, how it works and how you can contribute and raise your voice. I had a girlfriend the other day tell me, Julene, did you know if you will write to your congressman and print out a picture of your family on the letter and then write the letter, it's as equivalent to a lobbyist coming in and sitting in their office when they can actually see a family that is being impacted and saying what you need to say. So, whatever your part is, however you're feeling, to more precisely teach your children certain ways, or out in the community, or with education, or running for office, or supporting a good candidate, all these things will justify God, I believe, in intervening and healing and helping and protecting this nation. It says in the last days that it will be the great and terrible day of the Lord when he comes. And I have often thought, great, who will it be great for? And I'm understanding, I'm feeling it. It will be great for people who love him, who love freedom and liberty, and are up and doing something about it, because they know ultimately God has them. And I think it will be terrible for those that are just kind of sitting by idly, waiting for, the next goodie, or, to kind of be taken care of, or wondering why they're not being helped enough and getting angry and feeling a little disdain. Or I think it will be terrible for those kind of people. And so anyways, our topic today, when I read it, I thought, healing the economies and international relationships. Now, how in the world, this little obscure mama in Chevy Chase, Maryland, how am I going to be about healing the economy and the world, international relationships? I'm not sure that I'll firsthand be on the front line, and maybe you will. But I do know that our prayers might lead our posterity to do something someday. I was just in Fredericksburg, Maryland on Saturday. It's an hour away from downtown DC. In Fredericksburg, I said Maryland, Fredericksburg, Virginia. It's right on the Rappahannock River. I had no idea what a gem this little historical city is. Put this on your bucket list, Fredericksburg, Virginia. It's an hour away from DC. It's where the childhood home of George Washington is. It's where Mary Washington, his mother, had a little cottage there before she died. He pulled her from the farm out in the country and made her live in the city. And George Washington's sister has a home there. And all these places are open for tours. Abraham Lincoln spoke there during the time of the Civil War. There's great Civil War battles in history's beautiful visitor centers there. It was the most quaint, charming little place. And as I drove by, I was on this little trolley hour-and-a-half tour, and me and my husband and little girl are going to take our bikes down in a few weeks and actually bike the town and go in and take tours of all these historical homes that have been around since the 1700s. But as we drove past Mary Washington's home, little white cottage that's been added on, I thought about how George Washington called his mama the Reverend Mother, and how she was a God-fearing woman and no doubt, taught her children to fear God. And then it made me think, when George Washington was a teenager, he wanted to go off. Remember, we've told this story, and join the Royal Navy for England because his half-brother Lawrence had done that and was in the military for England. And so he wanted to be like his brother Lawrence, who he loved. And Mama knew that was not to be his fate and destiny. And she pled, and George Washington says she used earnest solicitations to get me to stop from going. And I just had to smile when I read that, because just like all of us mamas, we've had to plead and beg and yell and cry sometimes, almost like prostrate ourselves on the floor with some of these kids and the choices that they were making and we felt weren't right. And sometimes they do just go ahead and do it, but as a mama, I thought, I've had some moments like Mary Washington, and what the difference, her pleadings. She pled with little George, and she pled with God to stop him from doing this. And what a different country we would have had if George Washington had gone off and joined the Royal Navy. And I'm sure at the time she didn't realize that her little prayers and her pleadings would be the means of her son ultimately helping to birth a nation. And no doubt, his involvement in economies and international relationships, I would give full credit, would stem to that mother at a key point in his life when she needed to intervene, the prayers of a righteous mother. And I think it's interesting, I'll talk about this towards our end of our class, but what Congressman Tim Scott from South Carolina, did you listen to his rebuttal last week when President Biden spoke? And then Tim Scott spoke afterwards, and how he talked about his mother. Oh, it just brought tears to my eyes. And so anyways, we just don't know what our influence might be, but we're talking about healing the economy and international relations. Now, I'm just going to skim this lesson a little bit today. Definitely go back and read and review and fill in the blanks. But if we're really going to heal America, it starts off on the first page of Section 4, Seminar 4, Section 4. We have made it, girls. It says, if we're going to heal America, we have to heal this land in kind of consisting of two components. First, we have to heal our personal self and our families, and then we need, the second component is we need to have active participation. We need to learn, be steeped in these constitutional principles and learn what we can do to be a part of restoring them. So to be successful, it says in this first component, it's based really on our relationship with God. You know, we can't heal ourselves and our family if we're just giving lip service. It was so funny. Last week, I work out and I do these little fitness classes at the gym. Sometimes I'm a yogi girl and I do muscle classes. And we had the class outside in the parking lot next to the gym last week because the weather was nice and they wanted to have it outside so more people can attend with the COVID restrictions. Only 11 people can be in the class. So where would we have it? We had it in the parking lot of the funeral, the mortuary next to the gym. And I just had to chuckle. And actually, it was a sweet feeling as I walked into that parking lot next to the gym, because 27 years ago, I had driven into that parking lot with my husband when our beautiful baby, 10-pound baby boy lived a month and died. And I was going to that exact funeral home to prepare his little body and make arrangements. And I thought, how good God is. He heals hearts. 27 years later, I think nothing but pure joy at having the honor of carrying that little baby for 9 months and having him live for a month. And how now I'm working out in the parking lot. And I just felt such joy that I was able to be his mama for a short time, and the sun comes out in life and you move forward and you're the better woman, you're the better mother because of it. But that has nothing to do with what I'm just going to say, but that was just a side note. So I'm in my little exercise class now, and the teacher is yelling out at us, exercise is like a relationship. It doesn't work if you cheat. And I was doing burpees at the time. If anyone knows what burpees are, it's a very difficult exercise. And I just had to almost laugh out loud. Exercise is like relationships. It doesn't work if you cheat. And as I thought a lot about that this week, you know, about my marriage. And I'm not talking about the way the world would view cheating, but am I giving it my all to my husband? Am I giving it my all as a mother to my children? Am I giving it my all to establish the kind of relationship I want with God, so I can feel peace and faith and trust that he's got me, he's got my children, he's got my, you know, the people I love the most. And so it'll take a little bit of work on our part to, you know, remember to pray and to spend some time in the Word and to worship him in the way that feels right and good to us, and to teach our children these beautiful godly principles, and to teach them the principles that we're learning now, and to teach our grandchildren, to teach our adult grandchildren. And as we do that, along with understanding, you know, the restoration of these constitutional documents will be the very tools that we will use to maintain what God gave us, and also will be the means of ensuring this moral agency to be able to worship our God, the first and second component. And when both of these components are functioning properly, people are blessed, and we've seen it throughout our history, with freedom, with prosperity, and with peace. And this is why God cares about maximum happiness and the kind of governments his children live under, because that determines, look, he created us. He knows best where we will derive our peace and our happiness from. And so, you know, when we say the Constitution was written to protect families, it's true, to protect so we can live our lives and have liberty and have properties and have the good life in which we desire. So we talked about in this seminar you know, how to heal ourselves and our families in the first section, in our communities. And last week, how some specific basic amendments that would help that need to be passed or revoked in order to heal the Constitution. And today we're going to talk a little bit about what's necessary to restore prosperity, these free market principles upon which this nation was founded. So the founders had these principles of the free market and economic security in which they envisioned for this land. About 40 years ago, Dr. Cleon Skousen, who has written these seminars that we've been studying now, the Healing of America seminars, he prepared a recommended solution, and he entitled it "The Urgent Need for a Comprehensive Monetary Reform." And he sent this off to President Reagan, who they were close friends with, and he advised him in this area. And attached, he had this little summary letter attached to this monetary reform that he sent to President Reagan in the 80s. And he said, first of all, President Reagan, people need to understand the history of our monetary system, what the founders intended. And they need to, second of all, need to know the reprehensible history and record of the Federal Reserve. Remember, we talked about that in Seminar 3, what the creatures of Jekyll Island, how that Federal Reserve really came about. They need to know how that came about. And finally, they need to understand and have a practical program for a constitutional monetary reform instituted. And Dr. Skousen told President Reagan that if we would take his suggestion, we could have a return to prosperity. And then he listed those 49 things that are in the back of this Seminar 4. 49 things that need to be done to heal the nation. And we talked about that, I think, in section 2 of Seminar 4. These are also 49 questions we could ask people that are running for office to kind of get an idea of where they stand on some of these topics and issues. And so 1 month after Cleon Skousen sent this letter to Reagan, he received a response. And the response is right there where he says, I have appointed special commissions to address what you sent me, and I will be receiving their recommendations later on in the year, President Reagan said. And he said, I believe this program, your program for economic recovery, has started us on a right path. And President Reagan said, hey, let's not kid ourselves. There's no instant cures for the results of 40 years of mismanagement. This is Republicans and Democrats. Thank you again for these recommendations. I continue to work to justify your approval. Now, remember, they were good friends. And the library in Simi Valley, the Reagan Library, I don't know in California if any of you have been to that library, but there is a room named after Cleon Skousen in that Reagan Library. So they were good friends. And it's interesting that a lot of what was included in Skousen's comprehensive monetary reform is consistent to what we now call Reaganomics when Reagan was the president. And so here's a summary of some of the problems and solutions that Dr. Skousen included in this monetary reform. Number one, the Federal Reserve controls the country's money. So remember in 1910, a secret meeting of some of the world's wealthiest people, we call them master planners, the Vanderbilts, the Rothschilds, the JP Morgans met at JP Morgan's resort on an island off of Georgia. And they formed, how they could form this Federal Reserve to get control of the country's money. Therefore, they could kind of manipulate their competition in the markets and interest rates and so forth. And so what Dr. Skousen is saying is the solution is we need to let the supply and demand of the free market take back over and not have it be manipulated by this Federal Reserve. So we need to repeal the Federal Reserve. Now, it's really not that hard because it was an act of legislation that first formed it. So all you need to do is have an act of legislation to repeal it. A simple majority in Congress, 51% in both of the houses. And in fact, in the Federal Reserve Act itself, it outlines the procedure by which you could Congress could take complete control of the economy again. It's written right there in the Federal Reserve Act that was passed in 1913. And so isn't that interesting? It would be as easy as that. So what it would be is popularizing this idea and teaching our elected officials, get good constitutional congressmen that understand, what happened there to propose and to start to, it's a process of education to understand, what has happened with the Federal Reserve. So that's his solution. The second concern was the 16th Amendment. Now, remember last week we talked about 5 amendments that are needed to heal the Constitution. This would make up number 6. So he's proposing, Dr. Skousen, 6 amendments. And remember, the 16th Amendment gave the federal government the direct power to go into our homes directly and tax this federal income. And that's completely in violation of what the founding fathers said in the Constitution in Article 1, Section 9, where they were going to appropriate a direct tax to the states. So if where I live in Maryland, let's say it makes up 8% of the country's population, Maryland would then be responsible for 8% of that federal budget. And it was up to the state to decide how they were going to tax the people in the state. But the founders wanted it still to be a uniform a tax. But the people in the leadership in the state was to determine. So the 16th Amendment now gave the authority for the federal government to reach directly right into the individual. And also what it did is it produced a kind of a graduated scale according to how much you made. So if you made more, you were taxed more. And what it did is it made the wealth of, the wealthy, the money of the wealthy less sacred because they were taxed at a higher rate. And it was really kind of a program by the master planners to soak their competition, other wealthy people. So what it did is it allowed the federal government to tax people, and then to grow the federal government by spend, start, form all these agencies and programs. And then you could manipulate, because remember the 17th and 16th Amendment were passed right around the same time in 1913. And now the senators aren't beholden to the states anymore, but they're beholden to the people and the special interest and the unions and to pay for their reelections. And so Dr. Skousen says the solution, repeal the 16th Amendment. And then what would happen? Congress would just go back to focusing on their 20 enumerated powers, nothing more, nothing less. And in addition, and he would call that the Liberty Amendment, which would just revoke the 16th Amendment. And he would also include in that some provisions that would clarify that general welfare clause and the commerce clause, which the Supreme Court through the years has completely misinterpreted and maligned and given the federal government even more authority to spend where they felt, there was a need. And so that is another solution in healing that Constitution and to getting our money systems, taking the federal government here and shrinking it back to here and letting the states decide how they're going to educate or care for their poor, or, restrictions on businesses for their states. And so over the last several years, Congress, because of that 16th Amendment, and we've gotten so fat and bloated with all this money they're taking in from federal income taxes, we've grown the executive branch of the government. We now have over 500 administrative agencies, and under them, there are 2,600 programs, and they're making laws. And in the Constitution, the only people that were supposed to make laws were the congressmen that were voted in and vetted by the people. But now, because the government has had so much money from the 16th Amendment through the years, they have, they've expanded their power in the executive branch and have made laws and have set a lot of regulations on industries that have almost incapacitated, these industries. So Dr. Skousen suggests reversing these actions and deregulating American businesses, which would mean deregulation of the housing industry, the steel industry, the railroads, the agriculture, the labor, deregulate businesses. Right now, the EPA and OSHA can come into a business, they can give them fines, convict them, throw them into jail without any kind of jury or shut down their business. And there's not anything Congress can do about it right now as it stands. And so he's saying deregulate all of these businesses that have formed from these administrative agencies. Now, I watched a movie on Friday because we went down to the country, and Al and I'm like, Daddy, I said, Al, let's watch a little something that I could maybe recommend to the Mamas of America. Have any of you heard of the movie Atlas Shrugged? It came out in 2011. And it was about the time in America where we were so bogged down with regulations of the government. All the transportation systems were shut down, and there was only one railroad that was existing. And it it was kind of good. I don't think it did real well in the box office because just the nature of the free market and capitalism doesn't really bode well in Hollywood. So I don't think it got a lot of props from Hollywood, but there's a part one and a part two. And it really underscored what happens when the government gets involved and becomes socialistic, because socialism really is government owns all the major industry and nothing is privately owned anymore. And so it's kind of an interesting, so it's just a fictional movie and there's a love story in it. So they leave you hanging because there's a part two that was produced in 2012. And I think we just found it on Amazon Prime, but it really underscores what happens when businesses are just so bogged down with regulations, and we're seeing it, and we're seeing it now. And then Dr. Skousen also recommends removing the Patriot Act, which was signed by President Bush after 2011 to try and stop and obstruct terrorism. But what has happened over the last, 10 years or so under the Patriot Act is it's given them more authority to go in and spy on even Americans. And maybe that was the means of them doing what they did during the Trump 2016 campaign when he was wiretapped, or even the raiding of Giuliani a week or two ago. You wonder, because there are provisions in this Patriot Act that really do violate the Amendment for our unreasonable searches and seizures in the Constitution. But, because after 9/11, we were willing to give up some of our freedoms, he's saying we just need to remove that Patriot Act because now government is taking advantage of that Patriot Act. And so on the next page he continues to say, let's deregulate the auto, the airlines, even our education and corporate businesses that are owned by the government, Fannie Mae, Fannie Mac. Give the lands back to some of those Western states, eliminate control over the energy. And he said, these changes concerning all these operations seem pretty monumental, but they could be achieved again in about 4 years, and they are achievable. So, once again, these are ideas. Now, are you and I actually going to be able to be a part of this deregulation? Probably not. But, I just think it's good to kind of know the big picture, what we can do individually in our homes, in our schools, in our communities, nationally and internationally. So we're kind of thinking big here today. So now he talks about how can we restore America's international relationships. Now, remember in our 5,000-year leap, which we're going to study next January, I'm going to teach a class on the 5,000-year leap, these 28 principles that changed the world. The 28 principles says our founders wanted America to be a blessing and example to the entire human race, to kind of elevate the standard of civilization throughout the world, because they knew what God gave them wasn't just intended to be kept here, but to elevate and lift everyone worldwide. And so the founders were expansionists. They wanted to expand into, this new country of theirs, but they weren't imperialists like we saw, in the old world, where people wanted to, conquer and take over and hold colonies dependent and have authority over them. Whereas the founders were expansionists, and they wanted to expand, economically as well. Did you know that the founders actually had talked about having Canada on down to Cuba as a part of the United States of North America. And they also wanted Central and South America to be liberated, as well as Mexico, and encouraged their leaders to maybe, come together and be called the United States of Latin. And, obviously we know that didn't happen, but imagine a day someday of seamless borders amongst the Western Hemisphere. It's interesting that was a vision that they had. But that Monroe Doctrine that came to be under James Monroe, the 5th president in 1823, where they said, look, we're not going to meddle in any of, in any nation's business unless you attack us personally, and then we'll consider it an act of aggression and we will get involved. And even when King George III died in 1820, the new British administration wanted that Monroe Doctrine to prevent France and some of those other European countries from trying to, you know, try and conquer and come to war with us. And so it's interesting that the Brits actually encouraged that Monroe Doctrine for us to espouse that, look, we won't get involved in any other nation's dealings, but don't come onto our lands and you know, try and conquer us. So as we study kind of these aspects of our founders, as far as what they intended for our relationship to be with the other countries in the world, it is interesting, you know, to just anticipate how this nation accomplished something that has never been achieved, as now over 300, now it's about 320 million people. I think that's our population. I hear 330 million in the United States. Immigrants from Europe, Asia, Africa, Latin America, the islands have all throughout our history come and united, and we've learned to somehow live in this free society in relative harmony. It's not feeling so harmonious, you know, the last several decades, but how we've all been able to kind of mutually receive benefit from, you know, living under these principles. And indeed, you know, that's something that we're proud of. It is a gigantic melting pot. And we've demonstrated that these, you know, varied cultures can be blended together in a free society, and we can prosper as a nation. And that's really commendable. I think that's one of the things that's made us so great. And indeed, we've made that pledge, you know, that we would let people do their thing in other nations, and we would not meddle in the affairs of other countries. And the founders it's one of the principles. Look, I have two different 5,000-year leaps. They're both the same thing. This one was my first 5,000-year leap, but it's held together by a rubber band. This is how much I used it. So now I've switched over to my newer version. But how it says, it's principle 25, Thomas Jefferson said, peace and commerce, and this is one of the principles, peace and commerce and honest friendships with all nations, but entangling alliances with none. And that's what they intended, you know, and they didn't want us to be isolationalists, but they wanted us to be separate, kind of the new and the old world remaining separate places and spheres of influence, doing what we do, but yet still, you know, having good, honest friendship and commerce with one another. And that way that's, you know, if you're isolationist, you can't ever extend your goodwill or help others if you don't have relationships with them. And they knew, our founders knew that we were to be a light on a hill. You know, even our earlier Bradford, when he came across, you know, on the Mayflower, they knew that this nation would be a nation that would be a light on the hill for all the nations of the world. And so they've tried to, you know, create this vision of everyone striving for a higher level of civilization. And our founders knew that the Constitution, with those beautiful principles struck off by the hand of God, would be one of our best exports that we could share with the world. That freedom, peace, and prosperity that came from those principles would be one of our greatest exports, and could enrich all of mankind. And so this has been our challenge, in these modern times, to help America climb to that summit so the rest of the world can follow. De Tocqueville, remember that French writer who came to America in the early 1800s trying to figure out what made this new little country so great? And he wrote, America is great because they are good. And I believe good means godly, because they are godly and their principles are based on God's law. And when America stops being good, godly, they will no longer be great. He wrote that in Democracy in America. And so we've seen it's been a slippery path, hasn't it? And it's kind of been an upward struggle over the last 200 plus years to be able to kind of still lead in the way that the founders envisioned and be true to that vision. And so they intended for this Constitution to be a model to the world. So in the early 80s, Dr. Skousen was asked to kind of write a model constitution for some of the countries in the Western Hemisphere, Canada and some of the North and South American countries on down to Argentina. And as he studied 22 different constitutions in the Western Hemisphere, he understood that there was kind of a science in writing constitutions, and it included certain principles that our founders had included in the United States Constitution. Now, it's so interesting. There's a picture of Dr. Skousen. Do you see that? Shaking the hand of John Paul II, the Pope, who was the Pope from 1978 to 2005. He was a Pope for 27 years. And John Paul gave the most beautiful address in 1987 when Reagan was the president in the United States. And he gave this address extolling the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence and our founders. And so Dr. Skousen met John Paul at that time. And this was the time when Dr. Skousen was working with, forming constitutions for some other countries. Did you know our Constitution is the oldest existing constitution? You don't think it is because we're kind of a new little country compared to some of the old world. But our US Constitution is the oldest written constitution still in use. And it's one of the shortest. It's only 7,000 words, but it's powerful because we know what it produced, something quite remarkable when we were truly living correctly under it for the first 100 years. And so the Pope knew some of the work that Skousen was doing, and the Pope spoke about our Constitution. And he actually said that there would come a time when these constitutional principles should be taught to all the countries north and south in the Western Hemisphere, and that their constitutions should follow our constitutions so we could work in harmony. And then it's interesting when they met. So I know the daughter of Dr. Skousen, and she has told me this story. I've actually seen the letter of Reagan. It's on the wall in the Skousen home. I've been in that Skousen home. And I saw the little rosary that the Pope gave Dr. Skousen when they met. So the protocol when you meet a Pope is you kneel and you kiss a ring that he has. And Dr. Skousen, this is the conversation that his daughter retold to me, that Dr. Skousen said, I'm a high priest in my church of Jesus Christ. And so I have a commitment to God that won't allow me to kiss your ring because of that. And she said the Pope immediately stood and put out his hand and shook his hand. And he said, yes, I am familiar with your church. And I thank you so much for the work that you're doing with the constitutions right now. And then he pulled off the rosary and he said, I know you don't use this rosary, but I want to give you something. So he took it off and he gave it to Dr. Skousen. And that rosary is hanging in their home next to this picture. And it's just a beautiful, sweet exchange that John Paul understood the power and the beauty and the inspiration of this United States Constitution. And he told Dr. Skousen that one day we would see the unifying effort to get this movement forward in the North and South America. That's interesting. He said that. And so I just find it interesting that beautiful Pope understood, the specialness of this document. And so the science of writing these constitutions is there has to be a preamble and there needs to be, stipulation of principle and structure. And that's what we got in our 7 articles. There needs to be a Bill of Rights, a Declaration of Rights. And that's what we got with our Bill of Rights. And then there needs to be some definition of what our economic and our monetary policies are. And that's woven in our Constitution, but some of those are superseded as we formed the Federal Reserve and as we got, Amendments 16 and 17, which disrupted then, the economic and monetary visions that our founders had of the free market of supply and demand, kind of monitoring the markets. And girls, we've talked about this in seminar 3, but this naked capitalist and the naked communists are some of the best and easiest ways to understand, the market and what socialism does and what communism does and what, free markets do. In fact, one year in our cottage meeting, we actually studied these books because now, we've been meeting over 10 years. So this is a worthy read. I would at least get these and add them to your library of freedom and read them when you feel directed to, because that's something I don't even particularly understand too well, are the markets and the economies and Federal Reserves and interest rates and that kind of thing, and how they've been manipulated. But you need to know that they have been manipulated. And so, and the only time that the government should be involved in the free market is when there is to prevent force, fraud, monopoly, or debauchery. Debauchery is evilness or immorality. That is when the government, the founders intended, should be justified in intervening with the free market. Otherwise, just let the market kind of dictate with the supply and demand of these prosperity economics. So the Constitution, they knew, was going to be an export to teach the world about these principles and to model their constitutions after ours. And also, how do we export these sound principles? It says there's been a serious neglect of study of these principles and practices, which has really been the cause of our decline. Yeah, we've seen it. We've seen it in our lifetime, in our children. They're not being taught these principles. And so hence they're not really being implemented or being taught in other countries. And so how do we institute in other countries public educational constitutional curriculum and really the miracle of a true republic that we've had so much success with here in America? And Dr. Skousen implies that we teach the young people about these prosperity economics. We teach them the terms, what a free market economy is, what capitalism is, what the laws of supply and demand and that kind of thing are. And also teach them what socialism is. We know as you study socialism, there's been no civilization that has lived long-term under communistic and socialistic practices that have survived and thrived and done well, and people have lived in freedom. They don't live in freedom ultimately under socialism. And so to teach this to our children. And it says here that the impact of socialism on the structure of, and what is the impact of socialism on a republic form of government? The monumental challenge of this notion of how do you unscramble an egg once these principles of free market have been neglected and socialism creeps in. And so, I think we've all lived this firsthand as we've seen, all the programs roll in with Social Security and Medicaid and welfare and Obamacare and stimulus packages. Now people are expecting, well, of course, what are you going to do about it? We've had emergency. Now, how are you going to solve the problem and take care of me and my family? And it was so interesting. I was getting my nails done to see those red nails yesterday. And the little man that owns the shop said, I cannot find full-time employees right now because everyone is making more money on unemployment. And he said, it's about $700 a week that you can make in this area on unemployment. And I said, well, could your employees, could they actually even make $2,800 a month? And he said, oh, yeah, they could make more than that. They could make $3,500 a month. But if you could get, $2,700 by doing nothing or going into work and making a little bit more, what are you going to do? And he said his friend who owns the Vivint shop right next to him said, he said, I don't know what to do because I hire employees to work 4 days a week, but they want me to fire them. So they will call in sick 2 out of their 4 days, because if they're fired, they can get unemployment, or if they're laid off or they're fired. But if they quit, they can't get unemployment. So they're taking these jobs and then not doing a good job in hopes that they'll get fired. But of course, the small business owner has to pay a portion of that unemployment tax if they, have to let someone go. So we're seeing, this devastation of the socialistic programs devastating small business owners. So how do you put, the shell back on the egg once it's been cracked? So we have to warn these young people and these young people in the world the dangers of long-term socialistic practices. So he says, so how do we do that? How do we teach them to take personal responsibility for their own long-term success without turning to the government? to help them figure out when calamity strikes. And it's something that we teach, not only internationally in school systems, but here to our children. Teach them to get a basic education, to develop a skill, to have savings, to be a part of, some insurance programs, pooling your risk, own things, own a house, have a strong family unit, get married, and have skills which you can have purpose when you retire, ways in which you can serve. And I thought these are all beautiful ideas. And so, these are interesting truths that we've discussed here. I've given kind of you an overview of how we could restore, international economies and relationships. And it is an overview. And if you really wanted to dig a little bit further, I would read these. And I would also, you can get that monetary reform policy from the Thomas Jefferson Center. They have it in a digest form. You could actually purchase that. I've never read that. I've never been inspired to read it, but it is there if you want to read it. So, really all these important truths, girls, are contained within these 4 little humble little workbooks. I mean, it's the beginning of the solutions, and they're fleshed out enough, I believe. But, I kind of think going through these Healing of America seminars to me is like reading the Bible. You don't just read the story one time and, okay, I know it. It's a lifetime of study, because you're a different person when you read the scriptures at, 15 verses 30 verses 60, and God inspires you in different ways. And so I try and study something patriotic every single day. And this is why I've taken these seminars so many times. I've taught them and I've taken them. And really, The Making of America, this textbook, is really a beautiful standard that you would use for a nation that wants to rewrite or model their constitution after the United States, because it gives a line by line explanation of what the founders were thinking when they incorporated what they did into our Constitution. And so lastly, the little conclusion there says, obviously, there is a lot to be done in Healing of America when you kind of think about everything we've learned over the last 16 weeks. But the majority of the healing can be accomplished without amending the Constitution. He's proposing 6 amendments. I don't know if it's going to look exactly like the solutions that are proposed here in this Healing of America seminar, but I think it's a really good start, a really good way to open the dialogue that when we were doing our best, how were we living? What principles were we living under? It's what our founders gave us. It's what made us, within the first 100 years of America, even though we held 6% of the world's population, we were now producing 50% of the world's wealth. Something special was going on there. And so all we need is 6 constitutions, and then constitutional congressmen and senators that will know how to propose legislation and phase out these old laws and bureaus and regulatory agencies that were unconstitutionally established, and help us get back to that great nation that our founders envisioned and dreamed for, that would help be a light and an example and a blessing to the entire human race. And I really do believe, as the world is, especially in America, as we seem to have lost our way and getting further away from what made us great, what the founders gave us, it's causing many of us to wake up. I dare say that's why we've been coming to our online class for 16 weeks. And as we wake up and we kind of learn what needs to be reinstated or what needs to be repaired so we can continue to have this peace and prosperity and freedom, and that we can take this to the world. And so, in our sphere of influence, as I kind of consider what we discussed today, I'm not sure if we're going to be instrumental in repealing some of these amendments or restoring international economies or relationships. But I do know I can do what Congressman Tim Scott's mama did, that he talked about last week in his rebuttal to President Biden's speech. It was about a 14-minute speech that Congressman Scott, did anyone listen to that? Did anyone listen to it? Go back and listen to it. It is so inspiring. He said, when I was a young boy, he said this to national TV. I hope people were still watching after President Biden. Actually, I think I wasn't watching, but I went back and listened to Scott's talk. He said, when I was a young boy, my parents divorced, and he and his brother and his mother moved back to his grandparents' house, and they all had to sleep in one bedroom. And he said at that time, as a young boy, I was very disillusioned with life. But he said it was my mother's prayer that got me through that challenging time as a boy. And he said it was her example of prayer that caused me to become a Christian. And when I turned to God, it changed my life, is what he said. And he said, in one generation in my family, I went from the cotton fields to Congress. And he said, I am here because of the prayers of my mother. And he said, it was through her prayers. It was through her prayers that got him to where he was. And, you know, I'm sure that little mama at that time had no idea that her faith in God would someday produce a son that would put him in Congress, that might put him in a position to restore a constitution, to restore international relationships. So, you know, we just don't know the influence that we'll have just by being a God-fearing, praying mother on your children, your grandchildren, on the people that you love. I love that story that God says when he wants to change the world, it's not done through battalions or through congresses, but he puts an idea in the heart and the mind of an obscure mama in a simple little home. And she then instills it in the hearts of her babe. And then God just waits. The greatest forces in the world are not earthquakes and thunders and congresses and bullets and that kind of thing, but it is babies. When a wrong needs to be righted, when truth needs preaching, when a new nation needs to be formed, when a nation needs to be healed, he uses his inspired mothers and grandmothers to teach his children, to teach the babies, and then he waits. Women, I just can't tell you how strongly I feel that it will be the mothers and the grandmothers. We are the future of America, and it is in our hands. And God has put ideas into our hearts over these last 16 weeks. And now he's just going to wait and see how we instill these ideas into the people that we love. Please know that those who stand with us are greater than those who stand against us. I know sometimes that doesn't feel like that is so, but that is God's promise in 2 Kings. I just want to thank you so much for coming together over the last 16 weeks. I want you to know it's just been an amazing time for me. I have felt of your great power, probably more than you even know, as I see you show up and nod your heads and make little comments and sweet comments in the chats. And so we are going to take a 3-week break, and then we will start this whole Healing of America seminar again, same time, same place, June 2nd, for 1 hour is always our goal. And please invite your friends, your adult kids, church members, neighborhood. It's free. You've already got the manuals. It's going to be over summertime. So I'm not offended at all if you're at the pool or on the beach or listening at the lake or something, you know, as we're having our little classes again. But this time, because you've already filled in the blanks, you'll be able to take a different kind of note. And you're building your script for the time that you might teach this someday. No pressure.